Hi, Vivek. Should we give it a couple of more minutes to let more people come in?
Yeah, maybe we can give 2 more minutes.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We are very happy, especially given the late notice and busy schedule. So just give us a few more minutes as folks join. We'll be back on. We're just going to give folks just another minute to join. So please hold.
Hi, Shifali. I think let's get started, I think.
Yeah, that sounds great.
A warm welcome to everyone for this important webinar and consultation today. World Bank has been working with many of you over the last so many months and years on developing a data and innovation ecosystem. And in our work globally, we have found that the food system, in order to transform the food system, we find that creating, sharing, and analyzing data is a very important driver. And we have found it particularly during COVID-19. We saw what happened when people couldn't access food in many places, and people also, there were a lot of supply chain distortions across the food system. So in our experience, we have found that a lot of people spend a lot of time on accessing data and not end up analyzing and using it. So because there is too much of scattering and access to data is very limited, and people are not able to develop customized services and new business models in the agri-food value chain. Also, governments sometimes take decisions, public decisions, based on limited data and the perception, as opposed to really looking at the evidence of what part of the food system is working and what is not working. So, and also the World Bank designs about $6 billion of investments every year. And we find that the kind of data use and analytics which should be required to design those investments is also limited, in spite of us holding a lot of data ourselves. So Both innovation and data-driven decision-making requires bringing together multiple layers of data from different sources, global, local ground truth data, for developing more rigorous and actionable analytics. But the question is that in this age, does every country have to start from scratch or have to develop a full-fledged data ecosystem? A lot of data already exists and a lot is increasingly available on global open platforms, but landscape is very scattered and the use of data is not always straightforward to many stakeholders. So the question is of creating better use of the data, what is already available. Governments can also use this data to leapfrog and adopt data-driven policies and focus their capacities and resources on creating more the missing layers of data, the ground truthing, which is required to localize insights from these global platforms. And then also provide an ecosystem for innovators to access foundational data and analytics, and also the researchers to be able to do better research on the food systems. But it's not easy. If it was easy, it would have been done. Data can be public or private. All stakeholders don't have the same incentives to share the data. And because there are governance systems which are different according to the situation. Private sector wants to use data differently. Public sector wants to hold on to data and use data differently. So I think we need a more connected global data ecosystem to serve all the stakeholders in the food system. And we need an institutional innovation for creation of a global public good in this area. We as World Bank do not intend to create another global data platform or do this on our own. Objective is how can we create a process, an institutional mechanism which allows us to make better use of the existing data by creating infrastructure, data infrastructure that allows more use of data and more use cases to develop across the food system. And we are hoping to work with many of you as we go forward. So the purpose today is that we asked Shefali to do a landscape analysis and come out with some recommendations on how this should look like and what should be the ingredients of this system. And she talked to many of you. So it's like a report back to you on what we found. And also then second part will be a consultation where each of you can also give your, your ideation as well as suggestions on how we should design. If we are designing such a facility, global facility, what should we be doing and how it should be done. So without any further background, I think all of you, most of you know Shefali already. So I will not spend a lot of time on introducing Shefali. So over to you, Shefali, and please spend some time now on your presentation. And after that, we will go for a good consultation and discussion with all the key people who are here. Over to you, Shefali.
Great. Thank you so much, Parmesh. And hello to many of you. As Parmesh said, I am very excited since I've had the chance to work with many of you in many different elements. And for those who haven't, I'm happy to meet you. I'm going to be sharing my screen. I'll provide a little bit of context first, and then I'm going to dive into some of the outcomes that came up. So let's make sure you can see this. Great. So as Parmesh set us up, we really want to walk through what is the Global Food Systems Observatory, and really what did we learn from the discussions at Diagnostic and Interview to make sure that we really start to identify those key elements that go into the design of this, and how do we really harness this power. In the full report that we gave the World Bank team, it was about 60 pages long. There was a lot of case studies, examples that many of you provided. Here, I'm just going to capture a few examples to illustrate it, but I think for a lot of you, you are involved with these different cases. You're going to have more input. So we really do want this to be a discussion. In an ideal world, this is very much a problem-solving working session, just given the fact that there are a lot of questions and none of us have the full answers. It's really what we collectively can do. So we want to make sure that there's space for discussion as well. So, I think as for all learning sessions, I know it's tough on Zoom. We're in different time zones from all over. Thank you for those joining from Africa and Asia, but also early on the West Coast. Please use the chat. So Anna Linton from my team is monitoring it and grabbing questions out of it. Not only will we come back to it, we're capturing them to make sure we follow up and answer them, also send resources or ideas. I am going to pause between sections for clarifying questions. So again, please do send them through the chat. Do mute your mics just because I know we are expecting several folks. We're recording this, as you saw. And ideally, if you can turn on your videos, it is helpful, especially for many of you. I think, you're either working together or hopefully will be working together. We want to make sure that you feel comfortable connecting from the different parts of the world that you're in. So really appreciate it. And again, like I said, feel free to, Anna will signal me if she's monitoring the chat. So why are we here? I want to make sure we're clear on what is the Global Food Systems Observatory. And so, I think the idea is something that resonates with a lot of you because it's something that we've all dealt with, which is how do we really build on this power of this existing data that Parmesh spoke about and really amplify it and take it to the next level. I think many of us know that we've pushed quite hard in our own spheres, in our own areas. We've made substantial efforts. And yet there's this, we see kind of that what would allow us to really leapfrog and take it to the next level for ag and food. And in a lot of cases, we're running into the same problems, be it in different sectors, be it in different countries. So really the aim of this observatory is to build on these existing efforts and really bring them together. It's a tremendous amount of resource and learning. Support these available data and analytics so governments, innovators, others can really make the decisions they need. Resource existing projects with technical data skills. So a lot of what came out of the interviews with many of you was, we'll go into that in more depth. And really, I think going through and really leveraging, we have a lot around data processes, governance, and knowledge we'll dive into. So really, we talked about, this is about enabling better decision-making. We really need to activate this data on many levels, and really working with diverse partners is going to get us there. So I just want to walk through a little bit of what was our approach. And I feel like to put the caveats out there of this, this is just the starting point. We really scratched the surface. There's a lot that needs to be done. I consider this a working, living document, and even just me picking it up between, I put it down for 2 months and picked it up again and started changing it, right? There's so much that I've learned just in the last couple of months. That's the reality of the space we're in. So I'd like you to come with that sense too, that this is perpetually shifting and growing and changing. We had a pretty tight timeline for this diagnostic. It was 2 months. So thank you all who contributed in that tight timeline. The reality is, again, it's complex and difficult. Absolutely, as Parmesh said, if this was easy, if we could do it, we would have done it. And I think this is now a matter of how do we step back and create this holistic solution. I think the other piece here is, because of the breadth and depth of the target user, so just on the basis of who the World Bank serves from a country perspective, is they're so broad and diverse. We really need to have those diverse perspectives in the design, which, yes, it adds more complication, but it also creates a much better solution. And I think that's critical in the design part of this. I think one other thing that's important, so prior to this, what kicked off our data landscape scan was actually working with FAR, the Foundation for Food and Ag Research, and USFRA on their ag mission effort. And we did a large data landscape scan last year. We looked at over 600 organizations who had data. It was very US heavy. Did the second round for World Bank, and it was a very public facing, non-US focus. What we found shouldn't be a surprise to any of you. No country has this answer, right? This is a cross-cutting issue in ag and food. I think there were some hypotheses. People said maybe if it's you're a wealthier country, you have this, more tech. We are all facing these challenges. And I think, if we look at the flip side of that, it also means that there's a tremendous impetus not only to collaborate, but really there is value in us coming to some shared help, because realistically, we all need it. And quite frankly, that is also the nature of ag and food. And finally, as I kind of reinforced, we all have areas of expertise. I am in no means an expert in all of these areas. You each are. And I think that is why we do need, we talk about ecosystems and collaboration and why it's so critical. I just want to thank the data and digital team at World Bank. Especially want to thank the whole team, Mary Agnes and Vivek. We had such a short timeline and I pushed on them quite heavily and appreciate their feedback and help throughout that process, and Parmesh for his leadership. We had over 23 experts that we interviewed, and you can see a lot of you gave input, you shared your team members, resources, and really gave us a good sense of what was happening. And also Elena Sasakis, who was my research associate, and Anna, who is now the research assistant. So a lot of folks contributed in a very short amount of time, which we appreciate. The other part of the work, in addition to the interviews, was looking at a lot of the public major databases. There is a tremendous amount that is out there, and I think you know that. That's actually one area we'll come back to, but we did a sample, and just even from the sample, there's a lot of diversity, as you can see on the right. There's so much that we touch. The reality is, especially for institutions like FAO, any of the UN institutions, World Bank itself, the USDA, can go on, you have you have your own database universe inside that may actually not be inventoried as well, maybe inventoried, maybe not, but like just the complexity there. So if you think about this, this is a fairly, I say this, we have a lot of data in agriculture. Now, how that comes together and how we can use it is really the focus of this. So what would I have liked to do? And this is going to maybe next steps, but just something to think about, because we're going to be asking you this, is we'd like to be able to really understand some more about these databases, the breadth of it. I think we're having some kind of centralized inventory and really looking at it from a structured perspective. I think lessons learned. One of the things that's really important is we have tried various elements of what we're talking about here with the Global Food Systems Observatory. What we really need to make sure is that we are capturing not only what worked, what didn't, and I'm not sure if everyone does this after their projects. I try to ask my clients to do this, because it is very easy to forget things, even if you were intimately involved and you look back in a couple of years. And that actually leads to this kind of collective institutional knowledge loss, but also personally. I also think it's quite cathartic, quite frankly, to do that on all projects. So I tend to do that. I highly recommend folks, if you have a chance, it doesn't have to be long to do this. It helps to share with others. And then in terms of use cases, I think that's such a big part of informing design, and that's kind of the next step for this work. What are the meaningful and diverse cases that are going to allow us to design something with the breadth and depth that's needed? And really, it starts with what types of decisions do we need to inform? And so those two go hand in hand. And I think the more, to the extent that as you're thinking through this presentation and the work you're doing, the more you can help come forth with some of those ideas, the more helpful it will be. So I think a lot of us know that we are in an interesting place. Data and digitization continues to just shift and change dynamically. It's not slowing down. And if anything, some of the lagging, I think, elements we saw in ag and food are quickly changing. And that's great. I think for a lot of us, we have wanted that to happen. We've seen it. There are incredible examples around the world of people that are using all elements of this. So I think that, again, we continue to sit in a good window. Perhaps we also are sitting in a window where culturally and the mindset in the ag and food industry is also shifting. And I think that gives us space. We definitely see that from the government and some of the sector side. We also have a great opportunity to continue to really learn from other sectors. I always say there's an advantage. If you are slightly behind the curve, you can ideally learn from others and not have to spend resources and time to go through some of the pain that others have already gone through and learned from. So I think we're in a really interesting place. We have seen folks pulling from sectors like health, financial sector, high tech. We encourage us to continue to do so. So we know that we have several challenges. These are not necessarily unique to ag, but I'd like to run through some of the consistent ones that came up in the interviews, I think come up for a lot of us. So again, lots of data, not necessarily usable insights. Think that there's this misconception that data means information. Data is data, right? It has to be activated. For a lot of folks, it has to be combined. It's a lot that happens, as you know, to turn it into truly digestible insights that people can use. And I think this is the disconnect we're facing, which is we have this massive volume of data that's growing constantly. What we don't have is a lot of really meaningful insights that can drive the kind of decisions, whether it's policymakers, governments across the board, investment for the World Bank, and quite frankly, on the private sector and NGO side. We also have we're big. Ag is a decentralized arena, ag and food. So we have a lot of stakeholders with a lot of channels of information. So trust is really important. And I think it's something that we have all considered and we've worked through, is that how do we build trust, especially because the answer usually lies between several of us, whether it's organizations or sectors. And as we also know, trust is not easy to build. There's also the fact that we have territorialism in ag and food. And I feel comfortable saying I've worked in this sector for about 2 decades. I think sometimes, as much as we love to connect, we can be territorial. And I think that for this to be successful, which ultimately allows each of us to be, being able to put some of that down and work around it is going to be really beneficial. I think the other piece kind of connected to the lots of data, not having insights, it's what we have a higher quantity of data, not necessarily quality. So we also have an issue of how much of the data that's coming in or already exists is actually usable. What does that look like? And what will it take to actually turn it into something that's usable? We found, I think folks who are working in high res data, lots of the spatial images, a lot of noise in this. So there's an additional element that comes with, I think, in a lot of times we're mistaking quantity for other elements. There's the fact that there's a lack of comfort or knowledge in using data overall. So if we think of the folks who need this information, who need to make the decisions, be it the policymakers, the innovators, farmers, and producers, many often lack the technical knowledge. They're not trained in these areas, which makes sense. Or they're in different disciplines, right? So oftentimes might be the training, but we're crossing so many disciplines in ag. So there is a challenge that's basically, even with the digestible data, there still needs to be that kind of capacity culture and mindset piece, but also comfort with it. And then the last one, really just the fact that integrating just the whole curation management of this data is significant. A tremendous amount of energy and time goes into this. We reinvent the wheel a lot. I think we all know this. It's not serving us. It's frustrating, definitely to researchers and others. We have to find ways of really creating efficiency here, but really finding some consistency, especially with the amount of data sharing we'd like to do. So I'm going to pause here for if there's any clarifying questions you'd like me to go back to anything, because now we're going to go into ideally some solutions. Okay.
There are some questions in the
There
chat.
are. So thank you, Ankita. I'm going to come back to those because those are very good questions that we're going to try to answer in the next section, and then we're going to see how far we get answering them. So out of all of these discussions, we came to, what areas would have to be addressed to truly ensure that the Global Food Systems Observatory kind of achieves that goal of bringing all of this data to light in a way that can be used. So first, and I think, again, this is fully known as, we have many highly curated, well-managed data platforms, databases that are out there. However, there's still quite a bit of work that needs to be done in working between them. Most of the time, researchers, others creating applications, do need multiple data systems. And a lot of the energy and investment goes into just trying to build a way to connect these. So even in the highly curated databases, then we take one step away, we say publicly available, but maybe not as curated, having some challenges. There's quite a bit there. So one area is just amplifying and really elevating the existing databases and finding ways to use them well. We talked about digestible data. I know that this has been a movement, again, that's come up in a lot of, I think, many of you that are working, it's user-backed services. So really focusing and spending time. Yes, it takes more time with the users, but then the questions that are being answered, the structure that's being put in place truly answers the decisions that need to be there. data utilization and capacity building for users. So I know the World Bank, it's a pretty significant element of the organizational work to build country level capacity. I think for many of you in your different organizations, that's also similar. Really, this continues to be a huge area. We have some examples of programs that have done this and really, I would say, increase the return on their investment significantly. This is what leads to sustainability of a solution. And I think without it, you can often go back after 2-3 years and say, why is this data not being used? Why is this program not active? It's often because we skipped this, the very human people piece, to make sure that that capacity building was there and it actually stuck. Data management processes. So there's been quite a bit of work that has been done from the CJR suits all the way through around, can we create standardization, a lot of consortia that have been global, because we know that a lot of, whether it's data privacy, data interoperability, a lot of these elements, the more aligned we are as a community, the easier it is for us to be able to collaborate and work together and reduce some of that rework. So really taking this to the next level. We don't have requirements per se in agriculture and food. So a lot of it's voluntary, which is fine. However, if we can find ways to agree and really support some of these voluntary processes, that will make an enormous difference. We are still in a place where we are rather fragmented in how we want to set up and undertake, whether it's ontologies, the data sharing, and that just means downstream challenges. And finally, this is really, all of these kind of built up to this data and digital ecosystem. And what we mean by that is really this community. And I think it exists in many places. I think we have examples of communities that have come together, but disseminating knowledge, really continuously improving and sharing is key. And I think that one area that hopefully comes with the Global Food Systems Observatory is the idea of this active ecosystem. It's the people and the organizations that are coming together and working throughout. And I will say this presentation is text heavy, as this was part of the actual document submitted. So we will make sure that we share this after, because I'm kind of flying through some of these right now. We don't have to spend much time here. I think we know what the benefits of really looking at these fire areas in concert are. So I'd like to jump into what these, into each of these individual areas. And actually, before I do that, just once more, are there any clarifying questions on these 5 areas? Cool. So with the fact that we have so many platforms, but we're not exactly utilizing them well, is several reasons for why that is happening, including the fact that we have, so one is we have significant volume of public data everywhere, as you said, but it's not really visible. So unless you are deep in the know and you've been working on it, it's not very easy, especially if you're a newcomer, you're coming from outside the sector, to really find all of these databases. We also have an issue where ag and food, our value chain is extensive, but we often collect data and treat it in pieces. And so we have a challenge where we're trying to answer these really holistic decisions, holistic research questions, and it requires perpetually trying to pull together really disparate data. Where we saw this most is if you try to look at production data married with like nutrition, climate, and market. I mean, that's a lot of work. And for those who've done these models, that's stitching together quite a bit. And so that's, again, a challenge as we're having issues looking at the whole value chain. We also need an organizational appetite to really align and integrate these and to view these in concert. So what I mean by that is the organizational desire that this is a priority, that we can actually see all of these databases, that we have a way of bringing them together. There's another piece too that came out. So we looked at several of the public databases that either your teams have worked on or others. And then we looked at some user feedback, and they were not really, so they're public, but maybe not really accessible. So they might require a very high level of technical knowledge. They might require several, there's a lot to navigate to be able to extract information. Once the data comes out, there's quite a bit that might need to be done. So there's also a question of, there's a spectrum of kind of public and accessible that we face with these databases. And so that requires significant legwork to acquire and utilize it is another element that came out in discussions where folks said, this was supposedly public, but I needed to contact many people and there were some issues and there's just a lot of back and forth. So again, there are barriers that are in place to usage of this. I think finally, it is difficult to make a business case. So I've seen this several times over the years where people will say, well, we really want to invest in this. It's a hard business case because it just, I think the benefits are significant, but hard to quantify. And I think also it's maybe not as, I liken it to maintenance. Maintenance is incredibly important, high ROI. Companies don't really want to invest in it, largely because it's not seen as really sexy. Doesn't create anything new per se. It's incredibly important, again, as people who are in the community know, and we're in a similar situation where we keep, I think, bypassing what is a fairly impactful investment because it is hard to make that case, especially at the scale where we need to make that case. So what are some solutions? Well, one off, like by going to inventory, really creating a way to centralize, organize these existing databases, making it easier for folks to really interact with them on different levels. Efforts that have already started in this realm to integrate these databases with publicly available APIs so you maintain a decentralized network, essentially federated service, but really take out that rework and excessive legwork of just connecting and creating a nice clean way of bringing these together. Another theme that came up in the interview, so this is for the World Bank, was we would love to see more of the World Bank data organized and shared. And I think one area we did not get to was actually spending more time with those of you at the World Bank, but I believe also what are the needs internally and how can those be organized for your own work and then also be shared? Is a question that came up. So with databases, a concern that repeatedly also came up was, well, what about data privacy and security? And these concepts of open data. So absolutely, data privacy and security go with it. One thing to always remember with any existing database or any of these platforms, they do have privacy and security wrapped around them, right? They're going to be fully in place, often for where they're based and who they're serving. So you do get to utilize what that is. I understand that there's a lot of challenges in how that varies between countries, and that continues to be something for the World Bank of how to provide centralized data in a way that actually fulfills all of those needs. But I think the challenge also is you have this quote below, privacy is interesting because everyone has a different understanding of what privacy means. So I think in a lot of cases, it's not so much the technical element that trips us up. Technically, we have security, a lot of security tools, privacy tools. It's really a matter of understanding what that means to the users and those. So I think that's an area as the system is designed of how do you continue to maintain levels that create that. On open data, so this is again, this will be interesting. I know there is a balance of what is open data for the World Bank's investments, what isn't, depends on the investment, depends on the arena. But I think it's important to remember that not all data needs to be open, right? You can have different, it can be a spectrum of it. And sometimes I think the open data piece actually serves as a barrier for certain people to contribute and share. We've seen this on the private sector space. We've also seen it from farmers and governments, quite frankly. So are there ways to say we still want the benefits of sharing, but we don't have to make it all open? So that creates an incentive for more people to come to the table. However, we also have a lot of hybrid models where you have some parts that are open, some that aren't, and I think they work very well. So, and I think, this is the key is that that's really what we need to consider. So a few examples. So we have a University of Minnesota GEMS explicitly has data governance and privacy that they've put in place. So they've been able to build and have, as an academic institution, but have multiple private companies, public companies, and others contribute data, really store their data, and maintain a certain level of privacy and security that's quite explicit and allows for a lot of freedom of movement. I think the Precision Indoor Plants Consortia is interesting. This is funded by FAR, the Foundation for Food and Ag Research, where you have several private companies that came together in a $15 million investment, and they basically have been able to really do something I think that isn't often done is how do we bring together all this private data in a consortia, bring out more than what we had individually. Some of them are actually competitors, and create something that both will serve them and is ultimately a public good. So we actually have more information about, there's a great panel we did with some of the members of PIP, but it is an example of creating these databases and maintaining privacy and security in such a way that it incentivizes private companies. So we are going to see if we have, oh. Okay. We're taking a look at questions. So yes, so we're going to get to raw data. That's a great question, Elizabeth, because that is a huge issue. So we did kind of, I think of this as being, let's start with the highly curated databases, and then you start kind of going to the less and less curated data, to the raw data, which requires a lot of the processes we're going to get to. So next piece, and this is why I think it's important, these 5 areas go in tandem in terms of the design, is making these decision-backed questions. So when we talk about use cases, and this is something we did run into during our interviews, and I've seen this before, is yes, you all create these efforts with some use cases, but there are elements that sometimes are designed for design's sake. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just sometimes we go the other way. We have something, we're trying to fit it to a use, and it doesn't line up well. And so there are some questions around that. There's value in that. There's value in making sure data is available in any form, especially from a research perspective, but it's something to consider, which is, if you have clarity of use cases, it does change the entire design, forward. And I think there's some great examples from within the World Bank itself. And I think those are ones to really lean on in this design process of what happened when you really went with the user, spent that time and went back. And in a lot of cases, it might have added some resource, some time, but it created a system that had the elements of we want the curated data broadly, along with some additional elements that maybe increase the investment. So on the left side here, we also have a section in the report about the dashboard. So there's a lot of dashboards, and I think dashboards are definitely, really create great visualization. They bring data to life in many ways that people would not be able to interact with otherwise. There are different levels of dashboards. You almost start with like kind of a very basic visualization that comes, I think, with a lot of tools that allow you to play around yourself. There's the interactive dashboard that has a very interactive, friendly user face. And then you kind of get to what I think you see companies, especially in the private side, others offering, they're highly tailored, right? So you're actually going in there and creating the way that you're getting answers. It's incredibly costly to do that. And that is where, again, we see that shift in terms of what is available and what people are investing in. So a few examples, the food systems dashboard, I think many of you are familiar with this, a pretty broad collaboration led by the Johns Hopkins folks and GAIN and collaborators across the board, really trying to bring this data to life for policymakers and others. It's a fairly recent endeavor. They really started kicking recently, but it's a great example of how you pull this data together. And I think as they continue to move forward, their next step, and I think for a lot of these, is adoption, right? So how do we get these dashboards in the hands of the people who can use it so that they are using it and you're getting feedback about what they're looking for? And I think that's a big part of dashboards. Similarly, the Purdue Food and Agriculture Vulnerability Index, which was a collaboration between Purdue and Microsoft, really provided some really interesting insights during COVID and was pretty active, went up, again, similarly, built pretty fast in the sense that it was moving quickly with time, and did shed light on the impact of COVID on farm workers and identified some significant issues. So a lot of these dashboards are showing you can do the work, you can visualize, you can create it. How do we increase the users, actually the adoption, right? So how do we get this into the right hands and make sure? The hand-in-hand geospatial platform. So this is FAOs. I think a lot of you were involved with that. Really being able to, again, similarly, have this decision-making tool that brings together all of this data. I think, again, this is why we want to have space for discussion quite soon, because I'm interested in, where is it working and where isn't it? And it'd be interesting to hear some of your thoughts on what what could be done differently to really kind of amplify several of these dashboards. In the third area, it's really around creating and sustaining lasting use of data. So this is around training and data. So I think it's interesting. In lieu of having comfort with data, we tend to just make decisions with no data. And I think we've all seen this again and again. It's human nature. You will say, well, I don't understand this. I don't have it. So what can we do to really shift that? And I think, again, we saw this in COVID, where folks were making decisions where we thought that there was data available, but that was not necessarily being used. And a lot of it does come to, we have a gap between the data experts and the decision makers, and we know that. We have just the general comfort with data. And you also have a capacity issue. So if we look at a lot of the country level groups, the teams are stretched really thin already. Also adding new technology, new software to learn new data really puts quite a bit on them. So the other piece too is some of these portals are not easy. I will say, as someone who's feel like I'm decently technically capable, these were not easy systems to work in. I love that they're out there, but as we were playing around, I'm an economist and a statistician, and the amount of times I needed to contact help desks was not great. This is why I have research assistants, but that's a sign, right? If I'm struggling with my background, what do you do if you are in a government role and you have so many things on your plate? You may not always have that technical knowledge. So what falls off the table? That's a barrier to use, right? So how do we create, so it's both sides of it. One is definitely creating more capability and capacity and actively investing in it. The other piece is, the reality is, we just went through this on one of my client projects, is the irony. The people designing the tools can't be the ones who actually verify if the tools work. It's like economists shouldn't verify. I guess we shouldn't take our own experiments, is what we've learned over the years, but we're not the group. So we are the technically savvy people, right? We are the people doing it. We're going to design it in a way that's more central to us. And the piece here goes back to design it in a way where it's the diversity of the user. And something I've done with a few of my clients is we go to users who aren't even digitally capable. And that actually helps a lot. And I know several of projects that I've done that have worked really well. This is an area that does not get invested in well, but when it's invested in, so a few examples, Smart Farm, South Korea. This actually was, they presented in a learning series with World Bank about this a few times actually. There's many elements to this work. I wanna highlight the fact that they explicitly had training and capacity built in at multiple levels. And again, to have that from the beginning makes a huge difference. It means the uptake is greater, the adoption is greater. We're talking about that sustainability of the solution and that true change. Similarly, Societal Platform, it's a group out of India that came out of a nonprofit, and the goal really is making social change with this, but they embed capacity and capability into their platforms across sectors. So it's really interesting. You're having groups that are coming in from different angles that are starting to tackle this area. And I think that's where we're starting to see some of this real step change. Digital Green, again, another group that has presented several times, I think it's in the learning series and works with the World Bank. A lot of really their impetus and emphasis on the training element through extension agents really taking a role, the training that happens with smallholders means that there is a stickiness, right, to the solution. There's a sustainable shift. So you go from, we're trying to bring you solutions, to them actually going, we are creating the solutions and we have the pull. And that's that capability capacity shift. This takes a long time. I just want to, everyone we've worked with just wants to remind everyone, it takes a very, very long time. So again, depending on your project and investment, this could be a tough case to make because we're talking about many years and it's not always easy. These are really text heavy, so I'm just going to give you the high level so we can get to the discussion. This starts to come to, I think, Elizabeth, your question in the chat around raw data and other data. Yes, we have a data quality issue. So there's two things, right? One is how do we treat new data and everything we create coming in, and what do we deal with previous data and bring it in? I think from, again, the research community and those actively working in this area to inform, I think the quote on the right is really important, and I think we've all been there. My team spends 80% of its time in data curation and cleaning. We have this issue in every sector, in every organization. There's a tremendous amount of human capital waste really that goes into just doing this rework, because we don't have a great mechanism for necessarily sharing, for creating consistent standards, or even sharing the cleaning with others. And I think that is a pretty significant barrier to many of us. So being able to really align on whether it's fair data standards and processes around how these data work. So there's I'm not going to get into this slide. I think there's a lot we can do on processes and standards. I just wanted to highlight, I know that CG Institutes have done a lot with the communities of practice. They have fostered a connection. There's a lot that has happened. Again, I think with any ecosystem or community, you get out what you put in, right? So the more people that are involved, who are active, who are contributing. So some of the really successful COPs are ones where you have that kind of engagement, there's a lot of movement, and people are actually learning and sharing. And I think that is a great example of what is possible and what's going to be needed for us to get to that level, especially to support this Global Food Systems Observatory. And then this really kind of brings, we've talked about community a lot. It's the idea of creating these communities and connecting disparate stakeholders. So whether the folks who are on this call right now, whether folks that you're working with, crossing sector lines, we talk about private-public partnerships are incredibly important. They're not easy in any way, I know that. They're also incredibly valuable when we get them right. And we know that there's a lot that needs to be done. I actually gave a talk at OECD just about partnerships and what works, what doesn't, and how we can create more success in partnerships, just because there is a large investment that's needed to move them into success. But when it works, I said it's amazing. One other element, so you might know the participants for this discussion. It's those who I interviewed. So a lot of you are collaborators with the World Bank or work on other databases, systems, organizations. And the others, your World Bank colleagues and World Bank members right now working in this area. So for those who are outside the World Bank, a question that came up was, well, where do you see the World Bank playing a role? Because it's always interesting to see how folks, and I think there's a pretty consistent theme, right? World Bank is a convener and connector. And I think that's hopefully reinforced and seen within the World Bank itself, that there's a value in this community and ecosystem of the World Bank being able to play that space on a global scale, play even on a local and regional scale, to bring people together in a relatively neutral fashion so that people can ideate, problem solve, and hopefully find those spaces where we can connect. So something that I think everyone seemed to be pretty consistent about is we would like to see the World Bank do this more, and in the context of a Global Food Systems Observatory playing that role. So very quickly, these examples, you can't see this in the title, this is Kenya. So again, the Smart Farms example, really creating it's a holistic ecosystem. All of the elements we talked about were dealt with in some way in the investments, were continually reinforced through different agencies. There was a lot of training, there's connection, there's knowledge building. It really kind of drives. So you're creating these holistic systems that are reinforcing. And sorry, that was Kenya. And South Korea was the one that I mentioned earlier. And kind of doing that again. One thing on the Kenya one, and that one, obviously the DDA team can speak to, is it was a pretty broad investment. There's a lot of support that was done over time. And the investment started really on the data side, and over time really wrapped a lot of these other elements around it. So I think one thing too about this is, can we, how often can we get countries and projects to start by including all the elements? So I think there's often an impetus to put the data assets in and then think about processes, communities, capacity later. The more we can bring it in, and I think that was something that clearly helped in Kenya. We saw this in the Korea case where they were able to wrap this around. It just makes a huge difference. One other, I want to mention Open Team, who explicitly is building an ecosystem and community. And again, several of you, I think, are members. If you're not, I highly encourage you to become a member. It is an amazing place for just sharing information and connecting. It does have a stronger US focus, but it is global and has global members. And obviously with any ecosystem, the more people who come from the background, that will change it. So we're going to pause here because we have a lot of questions for you, and I want to make sure we also answer your questions and have a full discussion. So Parmesh, I would like to maybe answer some of the questions in chat and then go into a full discussion and have you take us into a discussion.
Should we weave your questions also into the discussion? So
Let's
that
just do
we
that.
start with
Yep.
answering them. Otherwise, it becomes
Yep, go for it.
because we have to look at the
Yeah, go for
the
it.
time management a little bit, because we don't want to lose people. People are staying put, and I think it'll be good to bring them in at this stage.
Yep.
So unless there are questions you can want to answer, you can take some of the questions now, and then I'll bring the process of discussing where we go forward. Do you have any other final slide after this, or you are finished?
I have a bunch of questions for the group, but I think that I can show that at the end. What would be great then is, why don't we start the discussion? Because I know you'd like to, ask some of the organizations and representatives here for their thoughts. So why don't we go there and we'll come back.
Sure. So I think what I'll do now, I think very important questions. Kate unfortunately had to leave from Johns Hopkins, but she really put a very good question about what is this food observatory going to do, and is it going to fill the data gaps, which are existing, and what about the private sector? Because we were expecting private sector to be here because we had invited some of them, but the timing because of the West Coast didn't work today. But it will be good to also look at what would be the role of private sector and how we build that collaboration, because e-commerce companies, we are working with many of them. Technology companies are going to be an important player in this data business. And all of them, large ones, are getting into agriculture and food now. And it's not going to be, if we restrict this to just the public databases, then we are not going to have a huge traction as products and services get designed there. There's also the issue which I think, which I would like people to talk about, is that how do we develop equity in this access part, which is the smallholder part? Because lots of data and digital applications are now servicing the commercial farmers better, and they are not necessarily leading to the kind of the product customization and adaptation for smallholders. So there is that issue also, and there is this whole thing which Rockefeller is working on, is called algorithmic justice for smallholders. So which is also something we need to look at when we are trying to do something, because we are in this not because we want to do things and help the private sector to work with that segment even more. We want the private and public sector to become more accessible to develop products and services for smallholders who generally don't have access to good quality products and services there. Okay, so let me move to now the discussion. So can you please raise your hand from the reactions box to indicate if you want to talk about it? Otherwise, I'll call on some people, and if I see some hands, then I'll start taking them one by one. But let me begin by bringing Andrea from Godan in, because I see you on the screen also. So, and can you come in, please?
Sure. Thank you very much, Parmesh. Thank you for this presentation. It was very interesting, and also for sending the file earlier. Just a few comments. First one is there's a trap that some organizations have fallen into, where they try to do everything for everyone at the same time, which leads to a complex situation for the users, which then have a hard time finding what they need exactly. And for those who are managing this, because it becomes a very big undertaking. So let's be clear as to who exactly we're trying to prioritize. Then in terms of the steps, I would suggest, if I were you, is first, I would start with the data that we know is already well curated and fairly well organized and somewhat under our control. Starting with World Bank data itself, I think would be a logical point, and then gradually extending to others like AFC, Johns Hopkins, USDA, for example. So those that you can reasonably well trust and control. Then there are a few things to be defined. What will be, as we expand, what would be the curating mechanisms and the updating mechanisms? Because as we grow, Some new data comes in, some old data ceases to be updated. So that needs to be managed in some way. Another thing that needs to be updated also, especially if we start tapping into private data, is anonymizing data. So that also requires some thinking and define a mechanism. For defining policies on confidentiality, on ethics. In Godan, we've done a lot of work on that, on ethics, on data related to agriculture and food. So we'd be very happy to help on that. 5, the comfort element on using data from the different users, which again, we have to be clear on, requires, to our opinion, requires some basic tools. Just raw data is interesting for researchers, but for the end user, whether it is policymaker or groups of farmers, just having basic tools that would allow them to address directly the basic questions that they have proves to be very useful. And finally, as we expand, we have to have a strategy as to, do we want to expand per country, per crops, per sector, where fits nutrition in that, where fits markets. So that should be part of a strategy that is clear and defined ahead of time. So these are my initial comments.
That's very, very important points. And I think Godan has a very kind of unique experience in this space. And I think you will be a very important collaborator as we go forward on that with us. Can I, Kate, if you are still there, you have made some very important points. I want to bring you in if you are still connected. Can you make your points, and please introduce yourself as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Schneider from Johns Hopkins. Thank you so much. And this is fantastic. And it's been a pleasure to engage with Shefali and her team so far. My questions are really, they may not have answers. These are things we're struggling with on our team too, but we're facing the biggest data gaps further downstream beyond agriculture. Because so much great attention has gone into the data systems for agriculture in the last 2 decades, but when we're thinking about the welfare of food insecure populations who are not smallholder farmers and people whose livelihoods depend on food systems because one or multiple of their jobs are in food systems, we really lack data. We lack data that's consistent across countries. The same thing can be said for diet quality, and issues of equity are really difficult. I think some of these data have been disaggregated by sex, which is a really important first start, and by age. Considerations of youth populations is really important, but there's so much more to do, and there's really big data gaps. And so I'm just curious, what's the potential for filling some of them in?
Thank you very much. Very important points. I think you clearly highlight that the data efforts have been skewed towards agriculture, but the food part is generally missing out. And we are conscious that we want to work across the food system. We just don't want this to be only agriculture there. And it's a very important point. And food system means that a lot of private sector will have to come in that data, because that data sits with them. You know, the e-commerce companies, food companies, agribusiness companies, they have that data there. But there is no right set of incentives to bring these together to really develop the public-private case for this kind of a platform. Thank you very much, Kate. Henry from FAO, would you like to come in at this stage? You are an important collaborator on the coalition which is coming up after the food system. So could you share your perspective on this, please?
Sure. Thanks for the very interesting presentation. And I think you touched upon most of the issues that I would also mention. I have 4 specific points I wanted to raise, which might be very specific, but I think they're extremely important. The first one is standards. Even the best of breed and the best in class are suffering from supporting the standards to the full extent. For example, much of the IATI project data that is available online has missing information on the locations, for example. So it's very difficult to put them, to make them available, to know from all organizations what is actually available in terms of project activities. Same is true for OGC standards, which are not supported for geospatial data by many organizations, or GeoJSON. So there are standards available, but we ourselves are not taking it to the extra step. And I think that's mostly related to the fact that many of us are using legacy systems, or we're using proprietary standards. So for example, Google is using their own proprietary standards. So they have a full-fledged system, but they're not following the standards that we are advocating for. The second point I wanted to make is who is paying for the extra mile. In the different discussions that we had in the innovation level, we've been talking a lot about interoperable data services. But the more successful you are in federating data, making it available, the higher your bill is going to be. So there is a break, as much as there is a break on, if I spend 80% of my time cleaning the data, why should I give it to others to benefit from my hard work? I think the same is true for data services. So in project activities, for example, why should I take it a step further? Why should I do the extra step if I'm not benefiting for it and I'm actually paying for the price for it? The third point is who's actually paying for this interoperable data services. So I think that's an important point to mention. And the last thing I wanted to mention is what more or less came out of some of the discussions we had in the innovation level and the coalition for data and digital, where the discussion was around OneMap, the marketplace, and the cornucopia work, is the need to work together and really work together across private sector, UN agencies, civil society, everybody together, nobody excluded, on foundational interoperable data services in the pre-competitive space, which is beneficial for, I think, a whole range of actors, also agripreneurs and startups, as well as it is beneficial for deduplication of our efforts. So those were the points I wanted to raise, Parmesh. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Henry. And so I would like to now, since we're talking about pre-competitive space, I'd like to bring Julie Rhines and Lakisha from FFAR, since they have been working on that space for some time. Over to you, Julie and Lakisha, anyone? Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. As Parmesh and others know, we spoke yesterday about bringing together coalitions or consortia is what we call them, and bringing together the data that each of these private partners may have. A little bit of background: FAR requires at least a one-to-one match on all of our funding, and we are in the business of creating public-private partnerships. We're given money by Congress, and we need to match it with industry, academic, foundation, et cetera, partners in order to provide grants to do this work. In these consortia, they take a long time to bring together, but we set out a fairly general goal, and we then work with various partners to get more specific over time, and to have them contribute to each of these sets of research. And the outcome is to then share the research and the data that has been accomplished in the pre-competitive space, and have it be less expensive, more cost efficient to do this research as a group rather than each group funding it separately. We typically have an embargo of 2 or so years on the data and the results. And in that way, the people who are part of the consortium, the groups that are part, get a head start on being able to use the data and the research results. We're doing this in several areas. One is the precision indoor plants work that Shefali mentioned earlier, and another is crops of the future. But then our biggest one, where we're trying to bring this data together to make decisions around climate change, at the farmer level, but also at the summary strategic level, is called Ag Mission. And that is just forming, where we're going to bring this data together. We're working with farmers on change management approaches, and hopefully all this will culminate in first a US-based approach to have farmers adopt climate smart practices sooner than later, and to see how profitable and productive they can be while doing so. And then we're going to spread out internationally. We're working with the World Farmers Organization in order to facilitate that.
Thanks a lot, Julie. I think much appreciate. I think we should watch this space because they are really, I first time heard that in pre-competitive space, there's a 2-year embargo on using the data for applications, and private sector has signed up for that, which is, I think, a big, I would say, achievement. And I think this might give us some indicators of how we should have private sector and public sector collaborating. And I think we will be hosting kind of a dedicated webinar on this example. We're trying to learn from all countries in this case. It's like, I think, because I think a lot of even our clients, middle income countries, are also asking the same question. So in this case, it's not coming from all the countries who are IDA countries for us, concessional finance, but all the countries who are even have more so-called well-developed food systems are also asking the same question. So thanks a lot, Julie, for your input. So I will now go with the way things are appearing in my screen. So Kevin, you have been raising some questions in the chat. Kevin, over to you. Please introduce you briefly as well.
Sure. Hi, folks. I'm Kevin Silverstein. I'm a scientific lead at the Minnesota Supercomputing Institute and also operations manager for GEMS, which is basically a data interchange and computational platform for agri-food sciences. As Shefali had mentioned, we made a very sincere effort from the beginning to try to include the private sector. We even had lobbied to have our state Congress basically pass an ordinance that made data that was placed into our platform, agricultural data, private and non-public, so that the folks could actually, both farmers as well as the private sector, could be assured that the data that they put in would be protected. And we actually included it within the platform itself a whole bunch of tools that enable them to anonymize their data in many ways, both geospatially, replace names, and do all sorts of things. And this has helped the organizations that have placed on their data, give them confidence to be able to share the data. Now, the challenge comes that we don't want the data to just be stuck within our institution. The whole point of this was a lot of people separately to share their metadata from the actual data so that others could discover what they actually had, and then they could say, hey, that could actually help me with my research project. Can we have access to that data? Then they would start their legal process to have an interchange and then share the data. So the important point of that is to allow them to discover what the data is out there. As a lot of you folks know, for every $1 spent in the public domain, there's $2 spent in the private sector on food and ag research. And so there's a ton of data that's not even on the table at the moment, and we don't even know what they're doing. And this was to incentivize that. So it's important, I said as well, we all know that the work that Elizabeth and Marie-Angelique and Pankaj and various other people in the ontology community have done to ontologies. I think we need more work on ontologies as well as standardized API interchanges so that we can share that data between platforms, because it shouldn't be held into one location. And in those interchanges, you need an idea about validation of your identity so that people in the private sector could know that if it were shared beyond, it were shared in exactly the way that they're confident with.
Thanks a lot, Kevin. Very, very important perspective which you are bringing in. I think ontology is a very favorite topic for all data scientists. And I can see the chat hotting up with Marie-Angelique and lots of people talking about data ontology. Very important part. I think the agriculture community is and the data science community and have not really talked to each other very significantly. And I think this platform brings that work together. And I think that will also be a good contribution to what we do. So I will now bring in our partner at the Gates Foundation, Stuart Collis, also to talk a little bit about what foundation thinks about this issue. Stuart, over to you.
Thanks, Pamesh. Yeah, I think, thank you for the presentation. It's good to bring this up. A couple of years ago, we had a couple of sessions on this topic as well, on data for decision makers, trying to bring together private sector and public sector initiatives just to discover, are there sort of common pain points or challenges around data? A lot of it, one area we hear a lot about is around just access to farm data. That's one area that seems to be a common challenge for private sector and development agencies and governments, is just having information about farmers, where they are, what they're growing, those types of data sets. So I think finding examples like that, where there's sort of a common need across different sectors, perhaps one way to prioritize what to focus on, because this is obviously an enormous challenge. It's not unique to agriculture and food as well. When we all hear this all the time and know it, that data scientists spend most of their time finding and cleaning data. So I just wonder, if the observatory is designed to lower barriers to leverage data for better decision making, what areas could be focused on. A lot of the things we've heard today around discoverability, metadata, access, interoperability, governance, ownership, maintenance of those data systems, and then the analytical capabilities to turn that data into information and knowledge and insights. So I just wonder, Pamesh, as we sort of talk through this, identifying, if you had an entity like this, there's so much data being constantly produced by so many actors. What would the role be? I think, discoverability is one. So, and there's examples in the private sector. So you look at Amazon's Amazon Web Services data catalogs, and Microsoft has data catalogs. There's other examples out there. How do you search and find that data? In order to do that, you've got to have good metadata, as was just mentioned by the GEMS team. So, but you also need, standards for the collection of data. That how do you attribute that data so it's discoverable? And then when you want to access it, how do you actually, does it have an API around it? What's the access and publishing requirements? Another area could be around open architectures. So we saw a couple of examples with GEMS and FarmStack and a few others out there, Open Team. Looking into how can we sort of agree on some of these architectures that could be replicated as well at not just global level, but at national level, state level, even down to community level. I think that's an area that could be interesting. And then access tools, and by that I include things like data agreements. How do you broker data sharing between private sector, public sector? How do you ensure trust? There's been a lot of work done by CABI, and I know Digital Green in Ethiopia with the digital certificates on FarmStack, but I think that's an important area to address. Analytical capabilities, as was pointed out earlier, a lot of people don't have those capabilities. So how do you provide sort of some level of open algorithms, access to such services? How do you strengthen data science capabilities within partners? And then I'd say just brokering those partnerships. So between big tech, engaging with the big tech companies, analytics companies. I mean, there's groups like Grow Intelligence. There's open data sets like Digital Earth Africa. How do we bring those together? Big Ag, you already mentioned. I think another really important one. Local tech, open data communities, and of course research like CGIAR. So I know that's a bit of a stream of consciousness, but there were just the thoughts that sort of came to mind as you went through the presentation.
Thanks a lot, Stuart. So very, very rich insights on what should be this doing. So I personally feel that we are getting a lot of options of what this should be doing, but we can also not do everything immediately. So it could be modular, But I think clearly this building partnerships between private and public and creating that space, the open competitive space, the pre-competition space, I think we have to work a little bit more on that. I think this I see hearing from again and again. But the discoverability itself, how do you discover data in much simpler way rather than go through a lot of hoops? That's another one. The usability, like we would aspire to be creating about 100 to 200 use cases, which could be used by decision makers and private sector across the platform. So create a largest community of use cases around agriculture. And there's an aspiration in that sense. So how do we go from accessing data to creating use cases? Because otherwise people say there's a lot of data, but it's not being used. So there are a lot of options emerging here. And I think once we have taken all these inputs and we go into the design phase of what the observatory could do. And that's the time I think a lot of you will also give inputs, and we would like different people to collaborate on different aspects of it, because you have comparative strengths on different parts. You're working already in situations there, and then see how we can do it. We also want to keep some target countries in mind where we will implement this. It's not just doing it at a global level and not having an idea on which countries we are going to be implement that. So I think, Stuart, thanks a lot for all your insights. So I think we are now coming to the end of it, but I would still like to bring in others who have points, since I'm not seeing anyone raising hands. So I'm using my prerogative as a chair to bring different people in. And now I see Simon Sala from Yara. Would you like to come in, Simon, to bring your perspective?
Yeah, sure. I was just writing on the chat box, so actually it's timely. It's better said, but easier said than written. Now I was just commenting on the fact that we benefit a lot, for example, from CG support to improve our ontology work, and then clearly it requires for us to remain constantly adapting every time we have a new customer. And just to introduce myself better, my name is Simone Sale, and I come from a group within Yara, which is called Open Farm and Free Data Sharing, which is now called VARDA. And actually they are calling me at this very same moment, probably some colleagues. A couple of things that I wanted to add is that digesting data, as we were saying, it requires like a tremendous and constant effort. So it's not really just a one-off activity. And the same goes with developing capabilities that are needed to use that data. And I think that, this is where some private sector company can contribute with resources, with data. The idea of embargo data that Julie was mentioning before is good. And based on my experience, this is something where other private companies I've been talking to are open to contributing to data analysis, engineering, science capability, and I think it will be important to what Andre was saying before, to kind of break down the scope and identify the target, the identity of the work, because that would really help leveraging some of the resources that are out from the private sector. An additional element that I wanted to touch upon was the licensing of the data, because being open doesn't necessarily mean that it's usable. It depends. And I think one key issue that I found with my colleagues within the company and beyond is that the ability to use the data to create derivative works is very important. So that's an element that should be in to some extent. And last but not least, an example I wanted to leave on the table is that of Copernicus from the European Commission. They established this, Copernicus generates a lot of data. And they established these 5 data and information access services platforms called DIAS. They all offer at the same time free data for everybody. So the free Copernicus is freely available for everybody. But they also competitively offer additional services, processing of those data, premium offers in terms of support, storage, etc., etc. And that could be an interesting model to look at the work that you will be doing. But I really think that having a Google for agricultural data would really be beneficial. And on my side, what I can say is that I'd be very happy to support on that. So over to you, back to you.
Thanks a lot, Simon. So I think this idea of having a Google Map equivalent of a farm agriculture is what we are discussing with Moonshot X in also the Google's Wine, and there's a group of people who meet very regularly and are really working towards this moonshot idea of having a Google equivalent product for doing that. But it requires a lot of effort, and look forward to seeing what comes out of that. Thanks, Simon, for all your contributions and all your ideas. Pankaj, I see you on the screen now. Would you like to come in?
Oh, hi, everybody. This is Pankaj Jaiswal from Oregon State University. I'm a lead on the projects on ontologies for plant biology. That was mainly in the genomic sector, but as we have evolved over the last 10 years, we've been developing standards for some of the food aspects and other groups, including the AgriPortal and things like that, for agronomy and things like that. And Elizabeth's group, who's leading the group, work on the compendium of ontologies that's also coming up along as part of that effort funded by NSF and things. So I think a lot of good discussion is happening on the chat about the data standards and things. So one thing that I was thinking about is a lot of data which is cleaned and analyzed or ready to be analyzed or reformatted. I think that has a great value in learning about evolving the new standards or enriching the new standards, because for building the new standards, we don't know exactly what kind of things are coming along. So how to capture the trends and have those things built in, and going the standards, people getting involved in the discussion right up front rather than at the end of the story. I think that is also a challenging issue, and how to sustain the efforts. So many times these are all very small funding efforts, and in order to maintain these standards and formats, if these can stay free and long-term sustainability, then other private and background efforts can go along with it, whether they have access or not. But at least the main thing is, if these standards are not free and they are not continuously evolving and they are not sustainable, I think that I think the discussion falls off at that level, because then it's free for all, and that's what is happening right now.
Pankaj, thanks a lot. I think standards has come in now. I think that's clearly going to be one of the things which any of such effort, global effort, should work on, because if we don't come out with some kind of a standard, then again, we will go into a very scattered kind of way. One of the reasons why we don't get data get converted into analytics and use cases also because the standards don't exist. Very important point. I would like to now bring Chris Justice, NASA Harvest. Chris, your views, please.
Yes, good. Nice presentation, interesting topic. A lot of problems raised, and I think it's a case of trying to find some solutions. So my thinking is that if you want to move forward, then maybe selecting, 4 or 5 areas where you think the observatory can have a comparative advantage and make a real difference. And in the process of doing these case studies would be to identify what the challenges are and solve those problems rather than just trying to do this in a vacuum. So I think moving to a concrete exercise, and those areas can be pressing problems that we're facing, targeted countries, maybe a range of scale, something global, something really local, and address, have the principles that you're carrying forward and address those through these case studies, and make the partnerships and exercise the observatory as you see it, create the ecosystem, really.
Chris, very practical advice. I think focus on countries, focus on issues, and rather than do everything under the sun. And I think that also should come out of this collective process of what people are already working on, building on it, because we need to demonstrate some early kind of wins.
Yes, exactly.
And how we could do it, because if this goes on extended, then it could die its death, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the reason why we have to, get these ideas. We already have some countries in mind where the governments want us to work with them on these systems, basically, because they want to transform from being just a kind of a perception-based decision making to more data-based decision.
No, I think so. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Those countries are the first set of candidates for us to go there. I have just one more possibility of one more question. I just want to see if anyone is interested in coming in. Elizabeth, would you like to come in since I've seen you already contributing a lot in the chat? Would you like to come in, Elizabeth?
Yeah, thank you, Pramesh. I replied to the ontology part because I've been leading the community of practice mentioned by Shefali, and really I think it's a very important point made that standards should be agreed, and particularly ontologies, because it also brings the flexibility of introducing the diverse views of the end users, in fact, because this is about a corpus of knowledge and language. So with ontology, not only you are annotating the data, but you are also modeling your knowledge, and it also enables to manage the diverse languages, because if you want to have an observatory that can collect data from at the national level or even beyond, then you may need to consider some other languages than English. And also I wanted to highlight, so this is why the selection of a country is very important, I agree. And then, yes, what I wanted to highlight is an observatory means that you have indicators for you to monitor the progress you want to see in those food systems. And then if indicators are defined, then you need after to understand what will be the data you need to really feed those indicators on a regular basis. So you need also processes to collect those data in a standard way, but also regularly, and then identify where the problems are and adjust, be flexible enough to adjust your indicators or your data collect path. And this will lead to use a mixed data streams from human recorded data up to the satellite. So it's also, I think, a challenge we need to think about is the mixing, be able to mix those different data streams and provide data that feed the indicators of such an observatory.
Thanks a lot, Elizabeth. Very, very rich insights. And I think we have to benefit from your rich experience of so many years on this as we move forward. So I will now, because we have to close it now because we will lose people otherwise. So I want to go back to Shefali, because I think the purpose was to listen to everyone and get their views, because these are very rich insights, and even what we are getting on the chat is very rich, basically. Shefali, over to you, and then I'll finally tell a little bit about how we want to proceed with this going forward. Okay.
Right, so I appreciate it. There's right at the juncture, we're supposed to start designing the solutions, right? And I think that this is great, and you're right. The question I put in the chat is the one I wanted to ask during the interviews and didn't, but this will hopefully come to us. What are those low-hanging fruits? And I see this as two different areas. You almost have this kind of ecosystem structure process piece that keeps coming up. There's use cases that go specific to the examples. And I think if we maybe think of those two separately, that's just trying to eat this elephant, which is a creepy analogy, but how do we break this down? It's big. I do think that one of the areas I'd love to see this group is to tackle the ones that we couldn't do alone, right? So we keep coming up against, I've spent 20 years wondering, why do we not agree on standards in ag? Why can't I go in and see where data sits in just a basic way between even the major players? We shouldn't be spending decades thinking about this. So I'd love for you all, because I think you've lived the same thing, as what do those look like? And the second is then a lot of the use cases you brought up, and how do we pick the right ones to start building this, knowing we're going to keep, it is living, it's growing, we're going to keep adding them. So I want to say thank you. I'm really excited I had this opportunity to work with World Bank, with FAR, with many of you, and hopefully I'll get to connect with you again in November. So thank you all very much, and thank you, Parmesh.
Okay, so thanks, Shefali, for leading this work and really helping us think through what the options are. So I really want to thank all of you for giving us very rich insights on what should be the unique things which this observatory could do. What should we get started with? And what are the things we should build on, low-hanging fruits, the design principles. So the next step here is clearly that we're going to do a design workshop on the observatory based on the learnings we have had, in which I think we co-designed this with many of you, basically. And once we agree on what the focus of the observatory should be, then we invest a little bit on the foundational systems. And we will come to a number of supporters of this agenda, because the World Bank does not have the global public good resources come from lots of bilateral and multilateral partners, basically. But we also need to bring in the private sector very strongly in developing and conceptualizing this, so that we don't end up doing this and then go to private sector as a fait accompli that what we want to do. So I think the co-production of the design is what the next step is going to be. We got a lot of rich insights from you on what the foci could be, what the principles could be, and what we could do. But this is something we will come back to you pretty soon, so that we do a kind of a design workshop on the observatory based on a lot of insights we have got there. We have some countries in mind, as I told earlier in response to Chris's point, that we have certain countries, we have about 16 countries which have shown interest in developing data and innovation systems on agriculture and food systems. Those countries is where the senior decision makers like ministers and top bureaucrats and a kind of a coalition is already emerging, and they are even willing to take our technical assistance and even borrow for some of the investments to be included in our investments there. So we will take that as the universe, but we will not restrict it to that. I think if there are 2 use cases or 3 use cases each of you wants to bring to the table, and we want to amplify them, as Shefali said, that it will be good to take the existing one and amplify them, I think this will be also another way we would look at it. So one which happens within the World Bank and one which happens outside the World Bank, because it's not something the World Bank wants to do only. We have to create a broader coalition, an advisory group, running a steering group of this observatory, and that's how we would like to do it. But all those issues are design issues, which we would come back to you later on. But thanks a lot, much appreciate your time and spending all your thoughts and ideas with that, and it will definitely benefit how we are going to work on that. Thanks to Shefali again for a very rich work she has created there. Thank you very much and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.